Hey everyone, my name is Wedge. Since the modern season is now in full swing, you should be expecting more modern deck techs for a while. If this isn't your bag, no worries. We'll still be bringing you standard deck techs as well. See, just everyone's happy, except of course the legacy and vintage players. My bad. We learned a few things from the Pro Tour. One of those things is that Abzan is everywhere, 28% of the field in fact. If this is going to continue, we have to find a way to fight it. What better way to fight Abzan than with, well, Abzan? Welcome to Podless Abzan, a deck that top-8'd the Pro Tour, a strategy that destroys the bigger Abzan decks and just might make you forget about losing Birthing Pod. Okay, maybe that won't happen, but this is as close as you're gonna get. The best way to label this strategy is by calling it a green-white aggro deck that splashes black to deal with unfair things. We'll start with the bottom of our curve. We have playsets of both Noble Hierarch and Birds of Paradise to ramp our mana. The Hierarch is also real good at giving Exalted. In the 2-drop slot, we're running 4 Voice of Resurgence and 2 Qasali Pridemage. This is where the whole deck starts to come together. Voice is a must in a strategy that's dependent on creatures. By the time we're done with this rundown, you'll see there are 25 creatures, more than enough to justify the Voice's inclusion even without Birthing Pod. Qasali Pridemage is here to do a couple of things. First, it provides another Exalted trigger. It's always helpful. Its real value, however, is in its ability. Destroying an artifact or enchantment on demand is incredibly powerful, especially in this new modern. Splinter Twin is all over the place, Affinity is still a thing, as always, and don't forget about Blood Moon. Not as crippling to your deck as most, but still not your favorite card. The point is that Pridemage is relevant in a ton of matchups. We've moved away from the Pro Tour list a little bit and cut down on Kitchen Finks. We're only running a pair of them. The card is great against burn and in long attrition-based games. The decision to decrease the amount in the deck is largely reactionary based on combo becoming more prevalent. We'll touch on this more later, but Kitchen Finks is basically the bee's knees against most strategies that aren't combo-oriented. The other 3-drop in the deck is Loxodon Smiter as a 3-of. The bigger Abzan decks love Liliana a lot. They also love Thoughtseize and Inquisition of Kozilek. You know what they're going to hate to see? Loxodon Smiter. In a format where there's more discard than ever, having a creature that cheats itself into play based on being discarded is hysterical. 3 mana for a 4/4 is definitely ahead of the curve, and while it can't stand up to Siege Rhino by itself, all it needs is one Exalted trigger and boom, outclassed. Because one creature to hose discard isn't enough, we're running 2 Wilt-Leaf Liege. With the same discard ability the Smiter had, you can imagine how sad your opponents will be when they force this into play. Not only is it a 4/4 by itself, but it gives most of the rest of your creatures +2/+2, since they're all green and white except for the Hierarch and birds. There are 2 efficient ways to use the Liege. The first is that you leave it in your hand to scare your opponent into not using their discard spells and abilities. Just leave it there and mess with them. The second is that you wait until you're ready to Alpha Strike, then cast the Siege right before you attack for a gigantic boost in power and toughness. In a lot of cases, it'll function like a mini overrun. It's versatile and powerful. The last creature in the deck is Siege Rhino, obviously. You'd be hard-pressed to not include this beast in any Abzan deck regardless of its playstyle. The Rhino creates huge life swings, beats most creatures in combat, and survives Flame Slash. Even better than that, it also gets +2/+2 from the Liege. Combine that with Trample and you have a seriously scary beater. The creature base is designed around 2 ideas. You want to play all your creatures all the time. Your Smiter and Liege are exceptions to this rule, but only if you're against a black deck that threatens heavy discard or you want to save your Liege for a game-winning swing. Next up is a playset of Lingering Souls, arguably one of the best quote-unquote creatures in the entire deck. The value from this one card makes it really difficult for most strategies to deal with. 4 1/1 flyers after flashback are not easy to fight profitably. Like most of the rest of the deck, it resists Liliana and fights other Abzan strategies pretty well. As for real spells, there are only 8, but we make them count. Playsets of Thoughtseize and Path to Exile represent our disruption and removal package. Thoughtseize helps to break up combos like Splinter Twin, Ad Nauseam, and Amulet Bloom. Path to Exile deals with problem creatures, basically Splinter Twin targets, Primeval Titan, and anything else we find too big to deal with. Tasigur is a great path target too, just saying. Anyways, while there isn't a ton of room in the deck for interaction, I strongly believe that these 8 spells are the best to include. I wouldn't want to take away from any other part of the deck to add more. Before we get into playstyle, sideboard, and all that jazz, let's cover the mana base. 4 Verdant Catacombs, 4 Windswept Heath, and 1 Marsh Flats are the fetch lands. They're joined by 3 Razorverge Thicket, 1 Godless Shrine, 1 Overgrown Tomb, and 1 Temple Garden. Besides the 3 forests, 1 swamp, and 1 plains, the only other land in the deck is Gavony Township as a 3 of. 23 lands in total, by the way. The land that should stand out the most to you is Gavony Township. This thing's a monster. You play all your spells within the first few turns of the game. Once you hit turn 5, there's usually nothing left to do but play whatever you top deck or wait for your opponent to discard your liege. It's at this point where Township becomes an all-star. It is your late game. Just activate it every turn. You're turning your hierarchs and birds into legitimate threats. It only takes a few turns for them to get out of Anger of the Gods range, which is pretty important. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. There's no Liliana or Tarmogoyf in this deck. You don't need Tarmogoyf to do what you're trying to do, and Liliana is counterproductive. You don't want to drop her on turn 2 or 3 when you can play a Kitchen Finks or get a Voice of Resurgence out there. You're about pressure early and often. Take advantage of your Exalted triggers, and remember that 1 trigger is all it takes for your Loxodon Smiter to beat their Siege Rhino in combat. Splinter Twin is a rough matchup. That's why we moved up to a playset of Thoughtseize. You gotta be a little more resilient. Zealous Persecution is a decent sideboard choice, but not my favorite since they often run more Exarchs than Pestermites. Slaughter Pact is a better option. I would bring in a couple Inquisitions, possibly a Nature's Claim or 2, and maybe a Relic of Progenitus. My gut instinct is always to bring in a Relic against Snapcaster decks, but Twin isn't as reliant on him as others are. You could bring in more Qasali Pridemage, but you should expect the Twin player to board in some heavy creature hate against you, so keep that in mind. You have your standard sideboard staples like Stony Silence or Kataki War's Wage for Affinity, Rule of Law, or Thalia for Storm, or other annoying decks that cast spells all the time. Fracturing Gust is some interesting tech that might be more relevant now than ever before, thanks to the resurgence of Infect players. It also hoses Bogles. The last sideboard card that really jumps out at me is Leyline of Sanctity. If you're running a deck with plains, Leyline is great to have right now. Burn and discard are both really not fun to deal with. It shuts them off pretty well. I know this deck isn't Birthing Pod. I know nothing can replace that for you, but it really is as close as you can get. The synergy between cards is still there, the individual value of your creatures, totally still a thing. If you're a pod player and you have no idea what to do in Modern now, maybe give this a try. I find it a lot more fun than the bigger Abzan decks. It also beats them more often than not, so that's a thing. What do you want to think? Is Podless Abzan something that you would consider playing? If you have any questions, comments, concerns, let me know down below and we'll chat about it. The format is still changing pretty rapidly and there's a lot of testing going on. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. As always, subscribe for the latest and most reliable Magic the Gathering information you could ever need. This is the Mana Source. I'm Wedge. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.